The lightning slashed across the sky like an angry scar as Daisy Matthews clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders. The rain had soaked through every layer of her clothing in mere minutes, turning the fabric into a second skin that clung uncomfortably to her trembling form. Her rain-soaked trunk sat beside her on the muddy ground outside the Silverpine stagecoach station, the last of her worldly possessions packed within its weathered confines. The year was 1876, and Daisy's journey west had ended not with the promise she'd been seeking, but with bitter disappointment. The stagecoach had deposited her in this small Montana Territory town, only for her to discover that the teaching position she'd traveled halfway across the country to accept had already been filled. The school board chairman had the decency to look embarrassed when he explained they couldn't wait another week for her arrival after the previous stagecoach had been delayed by bandits. Now, as the evening grew darker and the storm fiercer, Daisy fought back tears of frustration. The stagecoach wouldn't return for another 3 days, and the small town's only hotel had been devastated by a fire the previous month. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and only enough money to either buy food or secure passage back east, not both. "Miss, you're going to catch your death standing out here," a deep voice called out over the drumming of the rain. Daisy turned, squinting through the downpour. A tall figure stood on the covered porch of a building across the muddy street. The sign above the door read Kingston General Store, though in the growing darkness and rain, she could barely make out the letters. "I'm fine, thank you," she called back, though her chattering teeth betrayed her words. The man stepped off the porch and crossed the street, mud splattering with each deliberate step. As he drew closer, Daisy could make out his features beneath the wide brim of his hat. He was handsome in a rugged way, with kind eyes that seemed to pierce right through her pretense of composure. "No, madam, you're not fine. You're soaked to the bone," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl. He wore the practical attire of a working man, a worn leather vest over a simple shirt, durable pants tucked into mud-caked boots, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. "The name's Kieran Blackwood. I own the store here and the rooms above it." Daisy lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity despite her bedraggled appearance. "Daisy Matthews. I was supposed to be the new schoolteacher, but it seems I've come all this way for nothing." Understanding dawned on Kieran's face. "You're the teacher from Boston. Heard about that mix-up. Shame, what happened?" He glanced at her trunk, then back at her face, rain streaming down her cheeks like tears. "Look, Miss Matthews, I can't in good conscience leave you out here. Come inside and stay warm until we figure something out." "I couldn't impose," she began, but a crack of thunder cut off her words, making her jump. Kieran shook his head firmly. "It's not an imposition. Come inside and stay for as long as you need." Something in his tone made Daisy pause. It wasn't just the offer of shelter, it was the sincerity, the unspoken promise that extended beyond the immediate storm. For a moment, she hesitated, years of proper Boston upbringing warning against accepting such an offer from a stranger. But as another gust of wind drove the rain harder against her back, practicality won out over propriety. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice small against the storm's fury. Kieran reached for her trunk. "Let me get this for you." He lifted it with ease, muscles flexing beneath his damp shirt. "Follow me." Daisy gathered what remained of her dignity and followed him across the street, each step sinking into the mud. The warm glow from the store's windows beckoned like a lighthouse to a storm-tossed ship, promising safety and reprieve from the elements that had shown her no mercy. As they reached the porch, Kieran turned to her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. His eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, something that made Daisy's heart quicken despite her exhaustion and despair. "Come inside," he said again, softer this time as he pushed open the door. "And stay forever if you've a mind to. Silverpine could use a woman like you, teacher position or not." The warmth that greeted Daisy as she stepped through the doorway wasn't just from the crackling stove in the corner of the store. It was in Kieran's smile, in the gentleness of his hands as he took her sodden shawl, and in the promise of something she hadn't dared hope for when the stagecoach had left her stranded a new beginning. The general store was modest but meticulously organized, with shelves of goods lining the walls and barrels of dry goods arranged neatly on the wooden floor. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated blessed heat throughout the space, and Daisy found herself gravitating toward it automatically. "Let me close up," Kieran said, moving to lock the front door and pull down the shade. "Usually stay open later, but nobody's coming out in this weather anyway." Daisy stood awkwardly by the stove, water pooling around her boots on the wooden floor. "I'm afraid I'm making quite a mess." Kieran waved a dismissive hand. "Floors can be mopped, people shouldn't stay soaked." He disappeared behind a curtained doorway at the back of the store, returning moments later with a folded bundle of fabric. "My sister left some clothes here last time she visited. You're welcome to borrow them until yours dry." Daisy accepted the offered clothes with murmured thanks. The idea of wearing a stranger's garments would have scandalized her mother, but circumstances had a way of reshaping propriety. "There's a room through there where you can change," Kieran said, gesturing to the curtained doorway. "I'll put some coffee on." The small room behind the store appeared to be Kieran's office, with a desk covered in ledgers and a small window now being lashed by rain. Daisy changed quickly, grateful to peel off her sodden dress and undergarments. The borrowed clothes, a simple skirt and blouse, were slightly too large but blissfully dry. She did her best to wring out her own clothes before folding them neatly, then attempted to tidy her hair using a small mirror hanging on the wall. When she emerged, Kieran had set 2 steaming cups on a small table near the stove and pulled up a pair of chairs. He'd removed his hat and vest and was running a hand through his damp, dark hair, which curled slightly at the ends. "Feel better?" he asked, looking up as she approached. "Much, thank you." Daisy sat in the offered chair, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "Your kindness is unexpected. Out here, folks help each other. It's how we survive." Kieran took a seat across from her. "So, Miss Matthews from Boston, what brought you all the way to Montana Territory for a teaching position?" Daisy took a sip of coffee before answering, savoring its warmth. "There wasn't much left for me in Boston after my parents passed last winter. The house went to pay their debts, and teaching positions there require connections I don't have." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "When I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in Silverpine, it seemed like Providence." "I'm sorry about your parents," Kieran said softly, "and about the position. The school board should have sent word when they hired someone else. They likely tried." "The post out here isn't exactly reliable," Daisy said with a small, tired smile. "I just wish I'd known before spending nearly everything I had on the journey." Kieran studied her face for a moment. "How much have you got left?" Daisy flushed. In Boston, discussing finances would be considered vulgar, especially with a man she'd just met. But Boston seemed very far away now. Enough for a meal or two, not enough for a ticket back east even if I wanted to go back. "And do you want to go back?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Daisy stared into her coffee cup, considering. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "There's nothing for me there, but I'm not sure there's anything for me here either, now that the teaching position is gone." Thunder rumbled outside, but it seemed more distant now. The storm was moving on, though the rain continued to drum steadily on the roof. "Silverpine's a growing town," Kieran said. "We could use a woman of education. Might not be a formal teaching position, but there are children here whose parents would pay for lessons." Daisy looked up, a flicker of hope warming her chest. "You think so?" "I know so, and in the meantime." Kieran hesitated, then continued with a directness that was both alarming and refreshing to Daisy's Eastern sensibilities. "I could use help in the store. Been running it alone since my father passed 2 years ago. Gets busy, especially when supply wagons come through. I've got 2 rooms upstairs I don't use. One could be yours until you get settled." Daisy's eyes widened. "Mr. Blackwood, Kieran," he corrected gently. "Kieran," she amended, the informality foreign on her tongue. "I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't possibly accept room and board without proper compensation, and if you're offering me employment as well, I'm offering you a fair wage for fair work," he interrupted. "And the room is sitting empty either way. As for propriety." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Mrs. Holloway lives next door. She's the nearest thing to a moral guardian this town has. I'll introduce you tomorrow and she'll vouch for my character. Not that it'll stop the gossips, but it might ease your mind." Daisy should have been offended by his presumption. Instead, she found herself charmed by his forthright manner and practical solution to her predicament. It was so different from the careful, calculated social interactions of Boston. "I don't know the first thing about running a store," she admitted. Kieran's smile widened. "Can you count, read, write a legible hand? Of course. Then you know more than half the people in this territory. The rest I can teach you." He leaned forward slightly. "Look, Miss Matthews, Daisy," she said, surprising herself. "Daisy," he continued, and the way he said her name sent an unexpected shiver through her that had nothing to do with her earlier chill. "I'm offering because I need the help and you need work. Nothing more complicated than that. If it doesn't suit, you can leave anytime, no obligation." It was reckless, impulsive, everything her careful upbringing had taught her to avoid. Yet as Daisy looked around the warm store and into the kind eyes of this stranger who had offered her shelter from the storm, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. "I accept," she said before she could change her mind. "Temporarily, at least. Until I can secure more suitable arrangements." Kieran's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his features and caused Daisy's heart to perform a curious little leap. "Welcome to Silverpine, Miss Daisy Matthews," he said, extending his hand across the table. "I think you'll find that sometimes the best journeys are the ones that don't go according to plan." As Daisy placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work and the gentle strength in his grip, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps he was right. The following morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous night's storm had washed the world clean. Daisy woke in the small but tidy room above the store, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before remembering the events that had brought her there. Kieran had shown her to the room the night before, carrying her trunk up the narrow staircase despite her protests. The room was simple: a bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser with a pitcher and basin, a chair by the window, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. But it was clean and dry, and after her ordeal in the rain, it had seemed like luxury to Daisy. She rose and dressed in her own clothes, now dried after being hung near the stove overnight. The morning sunlight streamed through the small window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and offering a view of Silverpine's main street. In the daylight, she could see that the town was indeed growing, with new construction at the far end and people already moving about their business despite the early hour. A soft knock sounded at her door. "Miss Matthews, there's breakfast downstairs when you're ready," Kieran's voice called. "Thank you. I'll be down shortly," she replied, hastily pinning up her hair. When Daisy descended the stairs to the store, she found Kieran arranging goods on shelves. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and something in his expression as he looked at her made her smooth her skirts self-consciously. "Morning," he said with a nod. "There's eggs and biscuits in the back room, coffee too, not fancy, but it'll keep you going." "Thank you." "You didn't have to go to the trouble." "No trouble, had to eat myself anyway," he gestured toward the curtained doorway. "Go on while it's hot. Store opens in half an hour, and I thought I'd show you the basics before customers start coming in." The back room, which she'd only glimpsed the night before, served as both Kieran's office and a small living area. A table with 4 chairs occupied one corner, and a plate of food waited for her. Through another door, she could see a modest kitchen with a cast iron stove. Daisy ate quickly, surprised by her appetite. The biscuits were surprisingly good, light and flaky, and the eggs perfectly cooked. She was just finishing when Kieran entered the room. "Everything to your liking?" he asked, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "It was delicious, thank you." "Did you cook this yourself?" A hint of color touched his cheeks. "My mother taught me, said no man should be helpless in a kitchen. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Kieran said, a touch of sadness in his voice. "Died when I was 16, fever took her." "I'm sorry," Daisy said softly, understanding the loss all too well. Kieran nodded in acknowledgement, then quickly changed the subject. "Ready to learn the exciting world of general store management?" The next hour passed in a blur of information as Kieran showed Daisy the organization of the store, the pricing system, and the ledger where all transactions were recorded. Despite her initial anxiety, Daisy found the work straightforward enough. Her teaching background had given her a head for numbers and organization, and Kieran was a patient instructor. Most folks in town have accounts they settle at the end of each month, he explained, showing her the ledger. Some pay in cash, others in trade eggs, butter, occasional livestock. Judge the value as fair as you can, and if you're unsure, just ask me. And what about people who can't pay? Daisy asked, noticing several entries marked with a simple X rather than a payment record. Kieran's expression softened. We work something out. Nobody starves in Silverpine if I can help it. Before Daisy could respond, the bell above the door jingled, announcing their first customer of the day. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked beard stepped inside, stomping mud from his boots. "Morning, Kieran," he called, then stopped short when he spotted Daisy. "Well now, who's this?" "Sheriff Douglas, meet Miss Daisy Matthews," Kieran said. "Miss Matthews, this is Sheriff Warren Douglas, Silverpine's Law Enforcement." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Madam." "You're not passing through, I hope. Town could use more civilizing influences." "Miss Matthews will be helping me in the store," Kieran said before Daisy could respond. "At least for a while." Understanding dawned on the sheriff's weathered face. "You're the teacher who was expected." "Heard about that unfortunate mix-up. Board should have waited, if you ask me." "It's quite all right," Daisy said, finding that she meant it. "Mr. Blackwood has been kind enough to offer me employment until I can make other arrangements." Sheriff Douglas glanced between them, a knowing look in his eyes that made Daisy flush. "Well, that's neighborly of him. Kieran's a good man, Miss Matthews, one of our finest citizens." "I've gathered as much," Daisy said, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. The sheriff turned his attention to Kieran. "Need some tobacco and ammunition when you've got a moment." As Kieran assisted the sheriff, more customers began to arrive, curious about the new face in town. By midday, Daisy had met what felt like half of Silverpine's population, from the blacksmith's wife to the banker to a group of ranch hands buying supplies. Most were welcoming, though she noticed a few women eyeing her with suspicion. During a brief lull, Kieran brought her a cup of tea. "Holding up all right," Daisy accepted the cup gratefully. "Yes, though I feel rather like an exotic specimen on display. Everyone seems very interested in my presence." Kieran leaned against the counter beside her. "New faces are rare enough to cause a stir, especially." He trailed off. "Especially a woman alone," Daisy finished for him. "I understand. I'm used to being the subject of speculation. Even in Boston, a woman supporting herself invites curiosity." "It'll die down," Kieran assured her, "and as promised, I'll take you to meet Mrs. Holloway this evening. Once she approves of you, the rest will fall in line." "Is her opinion so influential?" Mrs. Holloway was the first white woman in Silverpine, came with her husband 30 years ago when this was just a trading post. "She's buried 3 husbands and raised 5 children here. Nothing happens in this town without her knowing about it, and nobody questions her judgment." Daisy nodded, understanding the social dynamics at play. Every community had its unofficial leaders, whose approval could make or break one's acceptance. The afternoon continued busy, with Daisy growing more confident in her duties as the hours passed. Kieran was patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she handled situations well. By the time he closed the store at sunset, she was tired but satisfied with her first day's work. "You're a quick study," Kieran said as he locked the front door. "Half the questions people asked today were just excuses to get a look at you, but you handled it with grace." "Thank you," Daisy said, pleased by the compliment. It wasn't so different from managing a classroom of curious children. Kieran chuckled. "I suppose not. Now let's get you introduced to Mrs. Holloway before she comes barging in herself. She's likely been watching the store all day, wondering why I've got a pretty woman working for me." The casual compliment brought color to Daisy's cheeks, but Kieran had already turned away to grab his hat, missing her reaction. Mrs. Holloway lived in a neat white house adjacent to the general store. Despite her age, which Daisy guessed to be approaching 70, she answered the door herself, standing straight-backed and alert with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "About time you brought her over, Kieran Blackwood," she said without preamble. "Been watching you parade her in front of that store window all day." "Evening to you too, Mrs. Holloway," Kieran said, removing his hat. "This is Miss Daisy Matthews, who I mentioned might be coming by." Come in," the older woman said, stepping back. "No sense letting the mosquitoes feast while we make acquaintances." The interior of Mrs. Holloway's home was a testament to a life well lived in the West. The furniture was a mix of sturdy frontier pieces and finer items that must have been brought from the East at great expense. Photographs and mementos covered the walls, telling the story of Silverpine's growth alongside that of the Holloway family. "Sit," Mrs. Holloway commanded, gesturing to a sofa. "I'll put the kettle on." When she had disappeared into the kitchen, Daisy whispered to Kieran, "She's rather formidable." "Wait until she starts interrogating you," he whispered back with a wink. "She makes outlaws confess just by staring at them." Sure enough, when Mrs. Holloway returned with a tea tray, the questioning began in earnest. Where was Daisy from? Who were her people? What education did she have? Why had she come west? Each answer seemed to satisfy the older woman, who nodded occasionally and refilled Daisy's teacup without asking. Finally, after nearly an hour of conversation, Mrs. Holloway sat back in her chair and addressed Kieran directly. "Well, she'll do." Kieran, who had remained mostly silent during the exchange, raised an eyebrow. "I'm glad you approve, but Miss Matthews is her own woman. She doesn't need permission to stay in Silverpine." "Of course she doesn't," Mrs. Holloway said with a dismissive wave. "But she does need someone to vouch for her character, and for yours, if she's going to be living above your store without setting tongues wagging more than they already are." Daisy, who had been taking a sip of tea, nearly choked. "Mrs. Holloway, I assure you, no need to assure me of anything, dear. I've known Kieran since he was in short pants. If he says he's offering you employment and lodging out of Christian charity, that's good enough for me." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "Of course, if it develops into something more, I'll expect an invitation to the wedding." Kieran coughed, looking as uncomfortable as Daisy felt. "Mrs. Holloway, you're getting ahead of yourself. Miss Matthews only arrived yesterday." "At my age, young man, getting ahead of myself is a luxury I can afford." She turned back to Daisy. "Now, as for your situation, Kieran mentioned you were to be our teacher." "Yes, but the position was filled when I arrived late." Mrs. Holloway frowned. "A shame." "But perhaps a blessing in disguise. The salary was meager and the accommodations worse. The school board is full of misers." She tapped her fingers on the arm of her chair thoughtfully. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Matthews. In addition to your work at the store, would you consider giving lessons to the children in town? Private tutoring, afternoons perhaps. I could help arrange it." Daisy's heart lifted. "I would love that. Teaching is my calling." "Good. I still have influence with most of the families here. Many of the mothers lament the quality of education at our small schoolhouse. A Boston-educated teacher offering additional lessons would be most welcome." Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. "And it would give you a purpose beyond shop work, which I suspect a woman of your intelligence requires." "Thank you," Daisy said, touched by the old woman's perception. "That's very kind." "Not kindness, practicality. Silverpine needs educated people if it's to prosper." Mrs. Holloway rose, signaling the end of the visit. "Now, I'll put out the word that you're under my protection, which should silence the worst of the gossips. The rest will quiet down once they see you're here to contribute to our community." As they took their leave, Mrs. Holloway caught Daisy's hand at the door. "Come see me anytime, dear. It gets lonely being the only woman of sense in a frontier town." Walking back to the store under the emerging stars, Daisy felt a weight lift from her shoulders. In just one day, she had found employment, potential teaching opportunities, and a powerful ally. Perhaps Silverpine held more promise than she had initially thought. Beside her, Kieran walked in comfortable silence, his presence solid and reassuring. When they reached the store, he paused with his hand on the door. "Mrs. Holloway likes you," he said. "That's not a small thing." "She's remarkable," Daisy agreed. "Has she really buried 3 husbands? And if town gossip is accurate, she's entertaining offers for a 4th. Kieran chuckled. "She's a force of nature." As they climbed the stairs to their respective rooms, Kieran stopped at the landing. "Daisy," he said, using her given name with a carefulness that made her heart skip. "I want you to know that despite Mrs. Holloway's teasing, I expect nothing from you beyond fair work for fair pay. Your reputation is safe with me." In the dim light of the oil lamp, his face was cast in shadow, but his eyes held sincerity that touched her deeply. "Thank you, Kieran," she said softly. "Good night." "Good night, Daisy." As she closed her bedroom door behind her, Daisy leaned against it, her thoughts in turmoil. In just 24 hours, her life had transformed completely. The disappointment of the lost teaching position had led her to this place, to these people, to this man who had offered her shelter from both literal and figurative storms. It was too soon to know what path her life would take in Silverpine. But for the first time since leaving Boston, Daisy felt something like belonging beginning to take root in her heart. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Daisy with its comfort and simplicity. Mornings and early afternoons were spent in the store, where she quickly mastered the inventory system and gained confidence in handling transactions. Kieran proved to be a fair employer, patient with her occasional mistakes and generous with his praise when she showed initiative. True to her word, Mrs. Holloway had arranged for Daisy to tutor several of the town's children in the late afternoons. The mercantile's back room became a makeshift classroom 3 days a week, with children ranging from 6 to 14 gathering to receive supplementary education in reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. The additional income, though modest, allowed Daisy to begin saving a small nest egg and repay Kieran for his initial kindness. More surprising than her professional adaptation was how quickly Silverpine began to feel like home. The initial curiosity about her presence faded, replaced by genuine acceptance as she integrated into the community. She attended Sunday services at the small church, joined the Ladies' Aid Society that met weekly at Mrs. Holloway's home, and even helped organize a town social to raise funds for new books for her students. Through it all, her relationship with Kieran evolved in ways both subtle and profound. Working side by side in the close quarters of the store created an intimacy that transcended their employer-employee arrangement. They developed a shorthand communication, anticipating each other's needs and movements with an ease that felt natural. Meals were shared, stories exchanged, and laughter became a regular soundtrack to their days. It was during a quiet evening in late September, nearly 2 months after her arrival, that Daisy realized how completely her feelings for Kieran had transformed. They sat on the small balcony outside her room, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. A bottle of blackberry wine Mrs. Holloway had gifted them sat half empty between them, and the gentle buzz of conversation from the saloon down the street provided a backdrop to their companionable silence. "Penny for your thoughts," Kieran said, refilling her glass. Daisy smiled, accepting the wine. "I was just thinking how different my life is now from what I expected when I left Boston." "Disappointed?" he asked, and though his tone was light, she detected a note of genuine concern. "No," she said honestly, "just surprised. If you had told me 6 months ago that I'd be living above a general store in Montana Territory, teaching children in a back room and learning to identify different grades of flour by sight, I'd have thought you mad." Kieran chuckled. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Indeed it does." Daisy took a sip of wine, savoring its sweetness. "My mother would be scandalized by my current situation, living under the same roof as an unmarried man working in trade." "And are you scandalized, I mean?" Daisy considered the question seriously. "I should be by all the standards I was raised with, but no, I'm not. There's an honesty to life here that Boston society lacked. No pretense, no elaborate social dances where words mean the opposite of what they say." She looked at him directly. "I find I prefer it." Kieran held her gaze, and something in his expression made her heart quicken. "I'm glad you stayed, Daisy." "So am I," she whispered. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities, until the church bell tolled the hour, breaking the spell. Kieran cleared his throat and stood, gathering the wine and glasses. Early start tomorrow, the supply wagon's due. Of course, Daisy said, trying to hide her disappointment at the interruption. Good night, Kieran. Good night, Daisy. As autumn deepened, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of the harsh winter to come, Daisy found herself increasingly aware of Kieran's presence. The brush of his hand when passing items in the store, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the deep timbre of his laugh, all these details she catalogued and treasured in private moments. She wondered if he felt the same awareness, caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There were moments when she thought he might speak, might bridge the growing tension between them, but something always seemed to interrupt a customer entering the store, a child arriving for lessons, the practical demands of business. It was Mrs. Holloway who finally addressed the situation directly. During one of their regular tea visits, the older woman fixed Daisy with her penetrating gaze. When are you and Kieran going to stop dancing around each other like skittish colts and admit what's plain to everyone in town? Daisy nearly dropped her teacup. I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Holloway snorted. Don't play coy with me, girl. I've lived too long for that. You're in love with him and he with you. It's written all over both your faces. Heat flooded Daisy's cheeks. Mrs. Holloway, really? Oh, save your protests. I'm not asking to embarrass you, but out of concern. Winter's coming and it's a hard season for those with unsettled hearts. The older woman's expression softened. What's holding you back, dear? Is it your position in his employ? Because I assure you, no one in town would think twice if that arrangement changed to something more permanent. Daisy set down her cup, considering how to respond. Mrs. Holloway had become a trusted confidante, and if she couldn't be honest with her, who could she be honest with? It's not that simple, she said finally. Yes, I care for Kieran deeply, but I came west to be independent, to make my own way. I've only just begun to stand on my own feet. And you think loving a man means giving that up? Mrs. Holloway asked shrewdly, doesn't it? Marriage means becoming a wife, eventually a mother. Those roles consume a woman's identity. Mrs. Holloway laughed, a rich sound that filled the room. Oh, my dear, is that what they teach in Boston? Out here, a marriage is a partnership of equals, or it doesn't survive. Do you think any of my husbands tried to confine me to hearth and home? They'd have been sleeping in the barn if they had. Despite her discomfort, Daisy found herself smiling at the image. Kieran and I haven't even spoken of such things. Well, men can be slow, especially good ones, Mrs. Holloway reached across to pat Daisy's hand. Just don't wait too long. Life is shorter than you think, and winters are long in Montana. The conversation lingered in Daisy's mind as October gave way to November and the first snow dusted Silverpine. The impending winter brought a rush of activity to the store as ranchers and townsfolk stocked up on supplies. Between the increased business and her growing number of students, word of her teaching skill had spread to outlying farms. Daisy barely had time to contemplate her personal feelings. Then came the day that changed everything. It was mid-November, and an early blizzard had descended on the territory, confining most of Silverpine's residents to their homes. The store remained open, though customers were few. Daisy was inventorying the back storeroom when she heard the front door open, accompanied by a blast of cold air and the heavy tread of boots. Be with you in a moment, she called, setting aside her ledger. When she emerged into the main store, she found not a customer but 3 rough-looking men stamping snow from their boots. Their clothes were travel-worn, their faces weather-beaten and unshaven, and something about their stance put Daisy immediately on alert. Gentlemen, she said, keeping her voice steady. How may I help you today? The tallest of the 3, a man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, smiled in a way that sent a chill through Daisy that had nothing to do with the open door. Well now, ain't you a pretty sight in this God-forsaken weather, he drawled. Where's the proprietor, sweetheart? Mr. Blackwood is out making a delivery, Daisy lied smoothly, grateful that Kieran had indeed left, though only to check on Mrs. Holloway, who had been feeling poorly. I'm managing the store in his absence. What supplies do you need? The 3 men exchanged glances and Daisy's unease deepened. The scarred man approached the counter, leaning on it with false casualness. We ain't exactly here for supplies, darlin'. We're here for the strong box. Word is the mine payroll came through yesterday, and Blackwood's holding it till the foreman returns from Helena. Daisy's mind raced. The payroll had indeed arrived, $400 for the silver mine workers outside town, but how did these men know that? Only she, Kieran, and the mine's assistant foreman should have been aware of the arrangement. I'm afraid you're mistaken, she said, keeping her voice level. We don't hold such large sums here. The second man, shorter but broader than his companion, chuckled darkly. No use lying, miss. We know it's here. Now, you can either open that safe nice and quiet-like, or things can get unpleasant. Daisy's eyes darted to the shotgun Kieran kept behind the counter, but the third man who had remained silent until now noticed her glance and moved to block her path. Don't even think about it, he growled. Heart pounding, Daisy assessed her options. The safe was indeed in the back room, hidden beneath a false panel in the floor. The money inside belonged to hardworking men with families to feed. Kieran had trusted her with the combination, a significant act of faith she didn't take lightly. The safe requires 2 keys, she improvised. I have one, but Mr. Blackwood carries the other. Without both, it cannot be opened. The scarred man's expression darkened. Then I suggest you find a way around that little problem, or the sound of the front door opening again interrupted him. All heads turned to see Kieran standing in the doorway, snow dusting his coat and hat, his expression shifting from casual to alert as he assessed the situation in an instant. Afternoon, gentlemen, he said calmly, though Daisy could see the tension in his shoulders. Something I can help you with? Just having a friendly chat with the lady here about your safe, the scarred man said, his hand drifting toward the gun at his hip. Kieran stepped further into the store, letting the door swing shut behind him. His eyes met Daisy's briefly, conveying a message she understood immediately. Be ready. Is that so? Kieran's voice remained conversational. Well, I'm afraid she's right about one thing: that safe isn't opening today. The payroll's already been delivered to the mine site. You boys are too late. A lie, Daisy knew, but a convincing one. She forced herself to remain still, though every instinct screamed at her to run to Kieran's side. The scarred man's face contorted with anger. You're lying. Am I? Kieran shrugged. Sheriff Douglas escorted it himself, not an hour ago. You can ask at the mine if you don't believe me. Indecision flickered across the robbers' faces. The shortest of the three leaned in to whisper something to the scarred man, who nodded reluctantly. We'll be checking your story, Blackwood, he said finally, and if we find you're lying. His gaze shifted to Daisy, the threat clear in his eyes. You'll find I'm not, Kieran said, his voice hardening. Now, you can either make legitimate purchases or you can leave my store. Those are your options. For a tense moment, Daisy thought violence would erupt. Then, with a final glare, the scarred man motioned to his companions. Let's go. This ain't over. As they pushed past Kieran and out into the snow, Daisy's knees nearly buckled with relief. Kieran was across the room in 3 long strides, gathering her into his arms before she could fall. Are you all right? Did they hurt you? His voice was rough with concern as his hands moved over her shoulders, her arms, as if checking for injuries. I'm fine, she assured him, though she couldn't stop trembling. They didn't touch me, just threatened. Kieran's expression darkened. Bastards. I recognized the one with the scar, Jake Hollister. He's wanted in 3 territories. He released her reluctantly and moved to lock the door. We need to get word to Sheriff Douglas. Those men won't go far in this weather, and when they discover I lied about the payroll. They'll be back, Daisy finished for him, her voice steadier than she felt. Yes. Kieran ran a hand through his hair, leaving it tousled in a way that made Daisy's heart ache despite the danger. I need to get you somewhere safe. I'm not leaving you, Daisy said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. This is my home too, and I won't be chased from it by criminals. Something flashed in Kieran's eyes: pride, tenderness, and something deeper that made her breath catch. All right, he said after a moment, but we need to prepare. They'll likely wait until nightfall. The next hours passed in tense preparation. Kieran sent a young boy who lived nearby to alert the sheriff, then closed the store early, barring the windows and doors. He brought down extra ammunition for his rifle and the shotgun, positioning them strategically. Daisy, refusing to be relegated to the role of helpless female, insisted on learning how to load and fire the shotgun. "I pray you won't need to use it," Kieran said as he guided her hands on the weapon, "but if it comes to that, aim for the center of the body. The spread will do the rest." As dusk fell, bringing with it heavier snow and howling wind, Kieran and Daisy sat in the back room, a lamp turned low between them. The payroll money had been redistributed, some hidden in various places around the store, some sewn hastily into the lining of Daisy's cloak in case they needed to flee. "Sheriff Douglas should have been here by now," Kieran murmured, peering through a small gap in the curtained window. "The storm must have delayed him," Daisy nodded, clutching a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The waiting was almost worse than the confrontation had been, each creak of the building in the wind causing her to start. "Kieran," she said suddenly, setting down her cup. "If something happens tonight, if those men return and things go badly—" He turned from the window, his face half in shadow. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Daisy. I won't let it. That's not what I mean." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Mrs. Holloway's words echoed in her mind. "Life is shorter than you think. I need you to know, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Because of you, because of us." Kieran went very still. "Daisy, please let me finish." She rose, moving to stand before him. "When you found me that night in the rain, I was lost in every sense of the word. You gave me shelter, purpose, a place to belong. But more than that, you gave me—" She faltered, then continued with quiet conviction. "You gave me a home, not just a room above a store, but a true home, in here." She pressed a hand to her heart. Kieran's expression transformed, hope and tenderness replacing concern. He reached for her hands, engulfing them in his own. "When I said come inside and stay forever that night," he said softly, "part of me meant it literally even then. I knew there was something special about you, standing there in the rain with your chin held high despite everything." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "These months with you, they've changed me, Daisy, changed everything." Heart pounding, Daisy moved closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Kieran Blackwood, are you saying what I think you're saying?" A smile tugged at his lips. "Depends on what you think I'm saying." "I think," she said, reaching up to touch his face, "you're saying that you love me, because that's what I'm saying to you." The last word had barely left her lips before Kieran closed the distance between them, capturing her mouth with his. The kiss was everything Daisy had imagined in her most secret thoughts, tender yet passionate, a declaration without words that left her breathless when they finally parted. "I love you, Daisy Matthews," Kieran murmured against her lips. "Have since you started organizing my inventory by color instead of type and arguing with me about the proper way to calculate interest on accounts." A laugh bubbled up from Daisy's chest, joy displacing fear despite their precarious situation. "That's when you knew you loved me." "During an argument about bookkeeping?" "That's when I knew for certain," he corrected, his arms tightening around her waist. "I suspected it the moment you accepted that shotgun without flinching. Knew it for sure when you stood up to Mrs. Holloway over the price of her preserves." "She was trying to undervalue them," Daisy said, remembering the incident with a smile. "And you love me for my business acumen? I love you for your courage, your intelligence, your compassion." Kieran's expression grew serious. "I love that you built a life here without compromising who you are. I love watching you teach those children, seeing their faces light up when they understand something new because of you." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes. "Even when I rearrange your store without permission." "Especially then," he said, pressing his forehead to hers. "Because you make everything better, Daisy, including me." The sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Kieran reacted instantly, pushing Daisy behind him as he reached for the rifle leaning against the wall. "They're here," he whispered. "Stay low and follow me." The main store was dark except for faint moonlight filtering through the windows. From their position behind the counter, Daisy could see that one of the front windows had been broken, snow drifting in through the jagged opening. "I count 3 shadows," Kieran murmured, his lips close to her ear. "Same men as before. They're trying to determine if we're here or if we fled." Daisy nodded, clutching the shotgun he had pressed into her hands. The declaration of love they had shared moments ago seemed to have filled her with a strange calm. Fear remained, but it was distant, overshadowed by determination to protect what they had found together. A voice called from outside. "Blackwood, we know you're in there. Send out the woman with the money and maybe we'll let you live." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Not a chance in hell," he muttered, then raised his voice. "The sheriff's on his way, Hollister. You'd be wise to leave while you can." A laugh, harsh and mocking, carried through the broken window. "In this storm, no one's coming, Blackwood. It's just us and you." Shots suddenly rang out, splintering wood near Daisy's head. She ducked instinctively as Kieran returned fire, the rifle's report deafening in the confined space. "Stay down," he ordered, moving to a different position. "They're trying to draw us out." More shots followed, an exchange that seemed to last an eternity but was likely only minutes. Daisy remained where Kieran had placed her, the shotgun ready, her mind racing. The robbers were firing from multiple positions, trying to catch them in a crossfire. Eventually, they would either hit one of them or decide to rush the store. A cry of pain from outside suggested Kieran had found his mark. "Got one," he said grimly, reloading, "but they'll be more careful now." "What can I do?" Daisy asked, unwilling to remain passive. Kieran glanced at her, admiration flashing in his eyes despite the danger. "When I move to the back, cover me. If anyone comes through that door," he nodded toward the front entrance. "Don't hesitate." Daisy swallowed hard but nodded. "Be careful." As Kieran made his way toward the rear of the store, using shelves for cover, Daisy shifted position to keep the front door in sight. Her hands were steady on the shotgun, her breathing controlled. Whatever happened, she would not fail him. The sudden crash of the back door being forced open sent her heart into her throat. She heard Kieran shout, followed by the sounds of a struggle. Torn between holding her position and going to his aid, Daisy made a split-second decision. Moving as quietly as possible, she crept toward the back room, staying low. Through the partially open door, she could see Kieran grappling with the scarred man Hollister, while a second figure lay motionless nearby. Kieran's rifle had been knocked aside, and Hollister had a knife, its blade catching the faint light as they struggled. Without hesitation, Daisy raised the shotgun and called out, "Stop! Drop the knife or I'll shoot." Hollister froze momentarily, his eyes finding her in the doorway. A cruel smile twisted his face. "You don't have the nerve, sweetheart." "Try me," Daisy said, her voice remarkably steady. "I've never shot a man before, but for him, I'll make an exception." Something in her tone must have convinced him of her sincerity. His grip on Kieran loosened slightly enough for Kieran to drive a fist into his jaw, sending him staggering backward. In the confusion, Daisy almost missed the movement at the front of the store. The third robber, whom they'd thought was positioned outside, had used the distraction to enter through the broken window. Before she could turn, a shot rang out and pain exploded in her upper arm. The impact spun her around, the shotgun clattering to the floor. Through a haze of shock, she heard Kieran roar her name, followed by more gunfire. She slumped against the wall, her hand instinctively pressing against the wound, warm blood seeping between her fingers. What happened next seemed to occur in fragments, as if time itself had splintered. Kieran, moving with a fury she had never witnessed, overpowering Hollister. The third robber advancing, only to fall as shots echoed from the front of the store. Sheriff Douglas's voice shouting commands, hands helping her to a chair, examining her injury. "Flesh wound," someone was saying. "Lucky." Then Kieran was kneeling before her, his face ashen, hands trembling as they cupped her face. "Daisy, my God, Daisy, I'm all right," she managed, though the pain was intensifying as shock receded. "Truly, Miss Matthews is tougher than she looks," Sheriff Douglas said, appearing beside them. "Though she'll need that arm tended to." Kieran nodded, not taking his eyes from her face. "The robbers, one dead, the one who shot Miss Matthews. Hollister and the other one are subdued. My deputies are taking them to the jail." The sheriff's weathered face softened as he looked between them. "You two make quite a team. Town's talking about how you protected that payroll." "Daisy protected it," Kieran said firmly. "I just provided covering fire." Despite the pain and the chaos of the past hour, Daisy found herself smiling. "I believe it was a joint effort, Sheriff." As Douglas departed to oversee the removal of the prisoners and the dead man, the town doctor arrived to treat Daisy's wound. The bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of her upper arm, causing significant bleeding but no lasting damage. Once bandaged and given laudanum for the pain, Daisy found herself growing drowsy. "You should rest," Kieran said, helping her to her feet. "The store's a mess, but we can deal with that tomorrow." "Kieran," she said, clinging to consciousness despite the medication's effects. "What we said before, did you mean it?" His expression softened, all the love she could hope for evident in his eyes. "Every word. I love you, Daisy Matthews. Today's events only confirmed what I already knew. I want to spend my life with you." "As partners," she murmured, remembering Mrs. Holloway's words, "equals." "Nothing less," he agreed, supporting her weight as they climbed the stairs to her room. "Though perhaps when you're recovered we might discuss making our arrangement more official." Despite her pain and exhaustion, joy bloomed in Daisy's heart. "Are you proposing, Mr. Blackwood?" "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "When I do, it'll be proper ring, bended knee, the works. You deserve nothing less." "I'd say yes even without those things," she admitted as he helped her onto her bed. Kieran's eyes darkened with emotion. "I'll remember that." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Rest now. I'll be right outside if you need anything." As the laudanum pulled her toward sleep, Daisy's last conscious thought was that she had found not just shelter from a storm, but a love worth fighting for. The rain that had brought her to Kieran's door had washed away her old life and given her a new one she would protect with all the courage she possessed. The aftermath of what became known in Silverpine as the payroll robbery transformed Daisy and Kieran's lives in ways neither could have anticipated. Their defense of the mine workers' wages elevated them to local heroes, earning respect and gratitude from the entire community. More significantly, the near tragedy crystallized what they meant to each other, removing any doubts or hesitations about their future together. Daisy's recovery from her wound was swift, aided by Kieran's attentive care and Mrs. Holloway's herbal remedies. Within 2 weeks, she was back in the store, her arm in a sling but her spirit undimmed. The townsfolk who came to shop often brought small gifts home: baked bread, hand-knitted scarves, jars of preserves, expressions of gratitude that touched Daisy deeply. The store itself had been repaired with the help of volunteers, the broken window replaced, bullet holes patched, and bloodstains scrubbed from the wooden floor. Life resumed its rhythm, though with subtle changes. Kieran was more openly affectionate, his hand finding hers when customers weren't looking, his gaze following her movements with undisguised adoration. Daisy, for her part, found herself imagining a future that once would have seemed impossible, one that combined independence with partnership, teaching with shopkeeping, and her own dreams with Kieran's. Winter settled fully over Montana territory, bringing short days and long nights. Christmas approached, and Silverpine prepared for the holiday with frontier practicality combined with genuine festivity. The general store became a hub of activity as people sought gifts, decorations, and special food items for the season. It was during this busy time, on a crisp December evening when the store had finally emptied of customers, that Kieran suggested they close early. "There's something I want to show you," he said, a mysterious smile playing about his lips. "Bundle up warmly." Curious, Daisy donned her heaviest coat, scarf, and gloves. Her arm, now fully healed, gave only an occasional twinge to remind her of the injury. Outside, the world was transformed by snow, every building and fence post wearing a cap of white, every tree branch outlined in crystal. The sky above was clear, stars emerging like diamonds on black velvet as twilight deepened. Kieran offered his arm, which she took gladly. "Where are we going? You'll see," he said, leading her down the main street and then onto a smaller path that wound behind the buildings. They walked in comfortable silence, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Daisy found herself marveling at how much had changed in just a few months. The woman who had stood alone in the rain outside the stagecoach station seemed like a different person, someone uncertain and afraid, holding her shattered plans together with sheer determination. Now she moved with confidence through this winter landscape, secure in her place in the community and in Kieran's heart. The path led them to a small clearing on the edge of town, where a simple structure stood that Daisy hadn't seen before. As they drew closer, she realized it was a cabin newly built, its logs fresh cut and its windows glowing with warm light from within. "Kieran?" she questioned, looking up at him with confusion. His smile deepened as he led her to the door. "Take a look inside." Daisy pushed open the door, gasping at what she found. The cabin's interior was small but perfectly arranged, with a stone fireplace already crackling with a welcoming blaze. Simple furniture, much of it clearly handcrafted, filled the space. A table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking sofa, bookshelves built into the walls. A curtained doorway suggested another room beyond. "What is this place?" she asked, turning to Kieran, who had followed her inside and now stood watching her reaction with an intensity that made her heart race. "It's a home," he said simply. "Our home, if you want it to be." Understanding dawned slowly. "You built this for us." Kieran nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to adore. "Been working on it since October with help from some of the men in town. Wanted it to be a surprise. But how did you find the time?" Daisy marveled, moving further into the cabin, running her fingers over the smooth wooden surfaces. "Early mornings, late evenings, whenever you were teaching or visiting Mrs. Holloway." He approached her slowly, taking her hands in his. "I know we've talked about marriage, about building a future together. I wanted to show you I meant it, that I've been planning for it, hoping for it." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes. "It's beautiful, Kieran." "There's more," he said, guiding her through the curtained doorway into the second room. Daisy's breath caught in her throat. The bedroom was simply furnished with a large bed and dresser, but what drew her attention was the far wall. There, built-in shelves and a desk created a small study area, and beside it, a blackboard had been mounted. "I thought," Kieran said softly, "that you might want to bring students here sometimes. Private lessons for those who need extra help, and a place for your books, your writing." The tears spilled over then, running freely down Daisy's cheeks. "You've thought of everything." "Not quite everything," Kieran said, his voice deepening. He released her hands and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. As promised months earlier, he lowered himself to one knee before her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Daisy Matthews," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. "When you arrived in Silverpine, standing in the rain with nothing but your trunk and your determination, you changed my life. You brought light and learning and laughter into a world that had grown too quiet, too predictable. You faced danger without flinching, built a place for yourself in this community through sheer force of will, and somehow, miraculously, found room in your heart for a simple storekeeper." He opened the box, revealing a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the firelight and threw it back in rainbow fragments. "I love you, Daisy. I love your intelligence and your courage, your kindness and your stubbornness. I love the way you organize inventory by color instead of type." This earned a watery laugh from Daisy. "I love the person I am when I'm with you and the life we've begun to build together. I want to continue building it day by day, year by year, challenge by challenge, joy by joy." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me, Daisy? Will you make this cabin our home, the store our livelihood, and this town our future?" For a moment, Daisy couldn't speak, overcome by the depth of emotion his words had stirred. All her life, she had feared that marriage would mean the end of her independence, the subsuming of her identity into someone else's. But Kieran wasn't offering that kind of union. He was offering partnership, respect, a shared vision that included her dreams alongside his own. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Kieran Blackwood, I will marry you." His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a sealing of the vows they would formally exchange before the community, but which they had already made in their hearts. When they finally parted, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I was thinking spring for the wedding, unless you'd prefer to wait longer." Daisy shook her head, smiling through her tears. "Spring is perfect, just enough time to prepare, but not so long that Mrs. Holloway starts planning the entire event herself." Kieran laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "She'll try anyway. She's already offered her garden for the ceremony." "Of course she has," Daisy said, not surprised in the least. She looked around the cabin again, marveling at the thought and care that had gone into its creation. "When can we move in?" After the wedding, traditionally, Kieran teased, then grew more serious. Though the truth is, it needs a few finishing touches. The roof's done and the walls are secure, but there are details to complete before it's truly ready. "We could work on it together," Daisy suggested. "I may not know much about building, but I'm willing to learn." Kieran's eyes softened. "I'd like that. It should be a home we create together." As they settled on the sofa before the fire, discussing plans for the cabin and their future, Daisy felt a sense of rightness, of completion. This was what she had been seeking when she left Boston, not just a teaching position, but a place where she could belong wholly, contributing her talents and being valued for them. The months that followed were filled with preparations for both the wedding and their new home. By day, Daisy and Kieran continued to run the store together, with her teaching sessions now expanded to include adult education 2 evenings a week. By night and during whatever free time they could find, they worked on the cabin, adding personal touches that would make it truly theirs. Daisy discovered an unexpected talent for woodworking, learning from Kieran how to sand and finish the furniture he built. She sewed curtains for the windows, arranged her books on the shelves he had crafted, and planned a garden that would yield both food and flowers come summer. News of their engagement spread quickly through Silverpine, met with universal approval. Mrs. Holloway appointed herself unofficial wedding planner, enlisting the Ladies' Aid Society to assist with preparations. The entire town seemed invested in their happiness, offering gifts, advice, and helping hands with the cabin. As winter began to release its grip on the land and the first hints of spring appeared, Daisy found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The disappointment that had once seemed so devastating, missing out on the teaching position, now appeared as the hand of fate guiding her to where she truly belonged. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, the kind of perfect spring morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. As promised, Mrs. Holloway's garden served as the venue, its early flowers providing a natural backdrop for the ceremony. The entire town turned out, creating an atmosphere of communal celebration that touched Daisy deeply. She wore a dress of pale blue silk, ordered from Helena at Mrs. Holloway's insistence. "No bride of mine is getting married in calico, dear." Her hair was adorned with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered by her students that morning. When she walked through the garden gate on Sheriff Douglas's arm, who had gallantly offered to stand in for her father, Daisy's eyes found Kieran immediately. He stood waiting for her beneath an arch twined with early roses, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new suit, his expression one of undisguised awe as he watched her approach. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, with the traveling preacher who served Silverpine and the surrounding communities officiating. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises that spoke of partnership, respect, and enduring love. When Kieran slipped the gold band to join the engagement ring on her finger, his hands were steady but his eyes shone with emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared, his voice carrying across the garden. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Kieran's kiss was tender yet passionate, a public declaration of private feelings that brought cheers from the assembled townsfolk. As they turned to face their community as husband and wife, Daisy felt a wave of gratitude for the storm that had brought her to this place, to this man, to this life. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing in the town square. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Daisy and Kieran moved among their friends and neighbors, accepting congratulations and well wishes, sharing their joy with the community that had embraced them both. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood." Kieran murmured as they finally found a moment alone, standing at the edge of the square while the dancing continued. "Deliriously," Daisy replied, leaning into his side. "Though I may keep Matthews for my teaching work, if you don't mind. The children are used to it." "Whatever makes you happy makes me happy," Kieran said simply, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Ready to see our home. It's finally finished." They had agreed to complete the final touches on the cabin separately, each preparing a surprise for the other. Daisy had finished her contribution 3 days earlier, but had kept it hidden behind a sheet when Kieran was present. "More than ready," she said, slipping her hand into his. They made their farewells, enduring good-natured teasing from the townsfolk, and walked the short distance to their cabin. The evening air was sweet with the scent of new growth, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. At the door, Kieran paused. "Tradition demands," he said, and before Daisy could respond, he had swept her into his arms. She laughed as he carried her across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Candles had been lit in their absence, casting a warm glow over the space they had created together. "Close your eyes," Kieran instructed, his voice low with anticipation. "I want to show you my surprise first." Daisy obeyed, hearing him move across the room, the sound of fabric being moved. "All right," he said after a moment. "Look." She opened her eyes and gasped. Where once had been a blank wall beside the fireplace, a bookcase now stood, but not just any bookcase. This one was designed with a rolling ladder, like those in the grand libraries of Boston that Daisy had so loved. "Kieran," she breathed, moving closer to examine the craftsmanship. "It's magnificent. How did you manage it?" "Had some help from the carpenter in Helena," he admitted. "Described what I wanted and he built the ladder. The shelves I made myself." He came to stand beside her, pride evident in his voice. "I know how much you miss having access to books. Thought this might encourage you to start building a proper library here." Daisy turned to him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect, absolutely perfect." "Your turn," he said, eyes bright with curiosity. "What's your surprise?" Smiling, Daisy took his hand and led him to the bedroom. "Close your eyes now." When he had done so, she moved to the corner where a sheet covered her creation. With a quick movement, she pulled it away. "You can look." Kieran opened his eyes, then stared in wonder. In the corner stood a cradle, beautifully crafted from the same wood as the bed frame he had built. "Daisy," he questioned, his voice unsteady as he crossed to examine it. Are you?" "No," she said quickly, understanding his assumption. "Not yet, but someday, I hope. And when that day comes, I wanted our child to have something made with love, just as you've made this home with love." Kieran ran his fingers over the smooth wooden rails of the cradle, visibly moved. "You made this, with some guidance from Mr. Peterson at the sawmill," she admitted. "It's not perfect, but it's beautiful," Kieran interrupted, turning to gather her into his arms. "You're beautiful, and the thought of you carrying our child someday." His voice faltered with emotion. Daisy reached up to touch his face, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "I never thought I could have this," she whispered. "A home, a purpose, a love like this. You've given me everything, Kieran." "No," he said, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "We've given these things to each other. That's what partnership means." As moonlight began to filter through the curtains, casting silver patterns across the floor of their home, Kieran and Daisy Blackwood began their life together as husband and wife. The journey that had begun on a rainy night outside a general store had led them here, to a love built on respect, admiration, and shared dreams. And as the years passed, the cabin expanded to accommodate their growing family, first a son with Kieran's dark hair and Daisy's determination, then twin daughters who combined the best qualities of both parents. The general store thrived under their joint management, becoming a center for commerce and community in a town that grew alongside their family. Daisy's teaching expanded from private tutoring to the establishment of Silver Pine's first proper school, where she served as headmistress while continuing to teach the advanced students herself. Kieran's business acumen led to investments in the silver mine, and later the railroad that finally connected their town to the wider world. Through it all, through childbirth and childhood illnesses, through droughts and prosperous years, through the challenges and joys that filled their days, they remained partners in the truest sense. Each supporting the other's dreams, each contributing their unique strengths to the life they had built together. And sometimes, on rainy evenings when their children were tucked safely in bed, Daisy would stand at the window of their home, watching the water stream down the glass, and remember the desperate young woman who had once stood alone in a downpour. Kieran would inevitably find her there, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask, though he knew the answer. "About how sometimes getting caught in the rain leads you exactly where you're meant to be," she would reply, turning in his arms to meet his gaze, still kind, still loving, even after all their years together. And in those moments, with the life they had created surrounding them, Daisy knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just shelter from a storm, but a love that would weather any tempest life might bring.